I think that I have a lot of respect for Madonna. She works hard at what she does. And I think that anybody that works as hard as Madonna does, or works as hard as I do, deserves everything that they get. And that's how I feel about Madonna.
Hi, I'm Saint, and in today's video we're going to be doing a critical analysis of Madonna. Also, I'm going to be reading from this, so if I'm looking down, just know I'm reading from a script, even though maybe I should get a teleprompter. So in today's video we're going to be doing a critical analysis of Madonna as a pop culture figure, but also critiquing the discourse surrounding her work and legacy. I'll be criticizing the lack of intersectionality in previous analysis of Madonna, and the portrayal of Madonna's public identity as representational rather than appropriative, ultimately creating an uncritical legacy and overlooking the contributions of her contemporaries at that time. So let's start this video off by defining what intersectionality is, and I'm just going to cut to the same clip. Intersectionality is a framework which encourages us to see how systems of oppression function together to create unique interaction effects which negatively impact marginalized groups. Black women don't experience double oppression, they experience an intentional form of oppression based on their sex and race. The concept of intersectionality is an interesting one, in the way it allows us to reflect and interpret the public experiences and narratives concerning Black, enabling us to better value their experiences and finally extend grace, love and empathy to those who have suffered under these complex systems of oppression. And what I will say about my last video, an intersectional analysis on Whitney Houston, is a lot of those core themes, this video acts as kind of like an extension or a part two. How I'll be specifically extending on the concept of intersectionality is how the suffering which emerges when you take an intersectional approach contrasts to the ease in which Madonna was able to craft her public identity, which has cemented her as an icon for the leaps and bounds that she made in gender and sexual expression, but seeing how it's not truly reflective of the experiences of marginalized groups within pop culture and music. A lot of the obstacles that we saw and still see many of her Black contemporaries still having to face with. Madonna is lauded as this innovative figure who paved the way with her use of religious imagery through her visual artistry. However, there are layers to who can benefit to Madonna's labor. Sam Smith and Kim Petras both used satanic imagery in their unholy performance at the Grammys, whereas Nicki Minaj was completely blackballed for her performance, which leaned into similar sorts of imagery. If this is the case, can we truly argue Madonna to be the cultural force that she is, if it means that how we talk about her legacy provides too much of a rose-tinted lens, which means we can't see the plight of marginalized groups and how a Madonna impact and influence wasn't an option for a Whitney or a Janet or Mariah. Madonna's impact and influence in the music industry can't be denied, but it's important to acknowledge that it didn't necessarily create an equal playing field for all artists. We need to critically examine the ways in which cultural icons like Madonna and our perceptions of art and pop culture are shaped, and consider how their legacies might be experienced differently by people from different backgrounds and identities. By doing this, we can gain a much more nuanced understanding of the impact of cultural figures and their artistry in society as a whole. So let's start off with defining more clearly what pop culture is. Stuart Hall, famous Caribbean British sociologist, defines culture as shared meanings generated through dialogue and interaction. Popular culture is understood as shared meanings which are dominant or broad in their visibility, perception and understanding. A concept like cultural hegemony is how, through establishing a traditional set of ideologies and norms, power can be claimed, used, and maintained. For example, beauty standards. There is a hegemonic standard about which bodies are beautiful, and this is influenced by forces such as racism, misogyny, and ableism. They're reinforced by the media, but I think also what we have to kind of be specific on is that it's reinforced within community. And pop culture is really interesting because it acts as this site of contention. Traditional norms and traditional values don't hold a monopoly over power. All types of individuals and groups are able to emerge and establish cultural meaning, power, and currency. Figures enter pop cultural dominance and influence because they represent something. They embody and reflect a set of values which a consumer can interpret, evaluate, and decide whether to participate in the meaning in which it was intended to be shared. For example, the Kardashians, they serve as this perfect example of people that we've imbued cultural power into. But I really think it's about what they represent that has caused us to buy into them. Through their reality show, they became representative of many different things, as it truly was their family dynamic which saw their popularity rise in the late 2000s, and also just this human desire for wealth, fame, luxury, excess. This can be more simply put as the American dream, but this drive to make at all costs, for example, Kim leveraging her tape to kickstart her family's now empire. But then they also become representative of almost desperate desire for fame and power that they represent. They also represent the privilege to become desirable and to be able to mold yourself into what is desirable. It's how Kim Kardashian became synonymous with the Brazilian butt lift, and how Kylie Jenner became synonymous with lip filler. But if cultural power acts as a form of domination, we must also understand it to be tied with some form of oppression. Pop culture often acts as this way to perpetuate harmful standards, and that's something we've definitely seen with the rise of the Kardashians. They become representative of this thing, and as it's become dominant, there's this exploitation and marginalization of other groups, particularly black women, that becomes a direct part of their success and a direct part of their domination. Madonna emerged as a significant figure in pop culture during the 1980s with her first album, Madonna, in 1983. From the start of her career, she's acted as a cultural disruptor, known for her provocative and boundary-pushing music and visual representation, which have boldly confronted and challenged traditional heteronormative ideas on gender, sexuality, and religion. Through her work, Madonna represents different realities and experiences, whether it's as a postmodern feminist representation of a multifaceted sexual woman, or the way she spotlights and represents queerness in videos such as Open Your Heart and Justify My Love. Her work and effect on the pop culture landscape has generated much critical and academic discourse, focusing on the analysis of her artistic choices and intent, and again, the way she's been able to generate cultural power through this representative quality of her work. Often touted as the most important cultural figure of the 20th century, there is a depth of literature focused on her success and impact, even with there being an entire academic subdiscipline known as Madonna Studies. Representational politics, subcultural identities, and cultural theory, a central Madonna Studies text, explores in detail how Madonna, through her bold representations, validates and platforms different identities. In particular, identities which have been marginalized by white hegemonic structures, such as, and I quote, African Americans, Hispanics, gay men, lesbians, bisexuals, and feminists. In the text, she's positioned as a low other, which is a term which refers to marginalized or disadvantaged groups which occupy a lower social and cultural status in any given society. The low other acts as this site of resistance and subversion. As members of these marginalized groups, or in Madonna's case, people who choose to embody subversive views, where they may seek to challenge their oppression through their forms of expression, which may be rooted in unique cultural practices. Again, and through cultural discourse about Madonna, and due to her transgressive politic, it's argued that Madonna exists within this space of the low other, almost like, in a weird way, almost like this Jesus type figure. And through her work, she is breaking down ceilings and breaking down walls so that others can emerge in a postmodern way where they can be free to be themselves without any restriction. And I think it's interesting this, when you it's kind of sort of off topic just a little bit, but like when you look at her debut single, Everybody, her record label Sire leaned into the racial ambiguity of Madonna's voice and her music. So until the music video which came out, which the label was hesitant to do, many people thought Madonna was black as she wasn't included in the cover art. From the start of her career, there really is this desire to position her or herself with the marginalized. But throughout this video essay, what we're really questioning is it really to create representation or to empower or merely just to appropriate? And has this been done intentionally? Because I think this idea of Madonna as a low other does ring true to some parts of her career from very early on, with her breakout album Like a Virgin in 1984 being the year where she performed at the first VMAs, and she was criticized heavily for her subversive use of a bridal motif and for its suggestive dancing. But does that entirely justify the way we look at her as this icon? I think a similar figure to kind of compare her to is Taylor Swift. And I mean, if you look at her sheer success, particularly now with her Midnight album, I personally always find it a bit interesting when her fans say things like, this is the music industry, and you know, she's defied all these odds. In many ways, despite how misogyny has kind of existed in the backdrop of Taylor Swift's career and even Madonna's career, they were always allowed to achieve such success.
I also wanted to kind of come on here and basically add 2 examples to kind of illustrate the point I'm making with these 2 women. So for example, let's talk about 1984, when Madonna released Like a Virgin, which was her first #1 and it was this massive hit for her. Here she's really starting to play with sexual innuendo and really seeing how far she can kind of push it. And again, it's really the song that made her a superstar. But then when you contrast it to the fact that even the biggest album of all time from the biggest artist of all time was struggling in the very same year to get his music, and particularly his music videos, played on MTV and even on radio. That's exploring the intersection between race and then also gender. And then even with Taylor Swift, again, we have the example of her, you know, topping the whole top 10 of the Billboard charts, when there's still many barriers that need to be broken for POC female artists to really break through and have such success like that. And then even with awards, I mean, we all saw what happened this year at the Grammys. But then again, even using Taylor Swift as an example, 2015, when she won over Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, which is it's ridiculous. And then even the infamous incident with Kanye West, he was making a correct point. The point he was making, despite the way he presented that, he was making a valid point.
Because there's so much opposition that they will never had to face. And what I feel will happen with the kind of there's a lack of intersectionality is we'll look back on something like Taylor dominating the entire top 10. You know, in 20 years time, will be viewed as this really like symbolic moment of how, you know, the glass ceiling is broken. And I think there was even statistics like, you know, it's the first time the top 10's been all dominated by women. Yeah, one. White women. An example which I think is really interesting to look at when we're talking about a kind of an intersectional analysis of Madonna is the music video for her song Borderline, which was one of her first top 10 singles and the final single of her debut album Madonna. In the video, we see Madonna in some sort of love triangle with her Hispanic boyfriend and a richer white photographer vying for her attention. She's then cast away by said photographer and runs back to her boyfriend. Analysis of this music video highlights the importance of the depiction of an interracial relationship between Madonna and her Hispanic boyfriend. And what it is, what's playing into, is this Barrio love story. Barrio is a word used in Hispanic and Latino communities to describe their communities, particularly where there's a strong sense of community and family, especially as it's talking about areas with lower socio-economical status. Essentially, it's talking about the ghetto. So what we see with Madonna tapping into this barrio culture and urban aesthetics is, and which she gets praised for, is that, you know, she's appealing to the street youth, and she's appealing to communities like the African Americans and Hispanic youth by circulating positive or relatable images of these groups. But is it really positive if, one, you're just tapping into these aesthetics to get your single to #1, and then also because the concept of the video doesn't actually work with Madonna positioned to be existing within this community? I mean, if the character was Latino, it would make more sense. You know, she's lured outside of her community, then she's rejected for beliefs and behaviors acceptable within her community, and then she realized the value of said community, which leads to her coming back. But this coming from a white woman, this is appropriation, and it does nothing to serve the communities being appropriated. I want to go back to Stuart Hall and look at one of his most helpful frameworks. His concepts on types of readings of media text illustrate simultaneously how dominant values and beliefs are promoted, how alternative viewpoints are incorporated, and how marginalized groups may resist, challenge the mainstream narrative. A dominant reading is a mainstream interpretation that aligns with the values and beliefs of the dominant group promoted by those in power. A negotiated reading considers the text and beliefs of the dominant group and those of the individual or subgroup interpreting a text, incorporating personal experiences and larger cultural contexts in which they exist. An oppositional reading resists the values and beliefs of the dominant group and challenges the mainstream interpretation of the text. This type of reading often arises from marginalized or oppressed groups and seeks to subvert the dominant narrative. Let's bring this to life. Tank and the Bangers, a soul funk group, went viral on TikTok for a spoken word piece entitled DM Pretty.
This boy be in my DM, say I'm pretty.
Let me play you a TikTok.
This boy be in my DM, say I'm pretty. This boy be in my DM, say I'm pretty.
A dominant reading of this text would be, and then from here I'll do oppositional first, because negotiated is really like the middle ground between oppositional and dominant. But oppositional would say that this TikTok is a form of cultural appropriation and misuse due to the context of the song being centered on the perspectives of a black woman, and who, due to systemic forms of violence, particularly misogynoir, doesn't really receive love and affection outwardly, so it's wrong for non-black people to participate in a trend. As if you were to appreciate the full context of the song, it's talking about black women and internal self-confidence. Now, a negotiated reading would likely consider the oppositional reading as well, but argue that as a TikTok trend, the sound can be used in various different contexts, particularly the way it's currently being used. It values that the original context is centered on a black woman's perspective, but might not necessarily see it as a form of cultural appropriation. And ultimately, I think I am sort of doing an oppositional reading on Madonna. I'm looking at how she's celebrated for challenging outdated and hegemonic norms, but then now I'm kind of critical of the fact that we don't look back and see, like, okay, although she was doing this amazing thing, how does her as a figure, how does it create these sites of, and this great book I read, which I'm going to quote for clarity in the Matrix, it says how it may create sites of erasure, oversimplification, and complexity in relation to intersecting identities. How is she complicit, and how is she still a benefactor in the oppression of marginalized groups that people argue she mirrors and embodies as a form of resistance? And then again, it's something I kind of intentionally didn't talk about in my Janet series, but like, if we compare Madonna's public presentation and sexual expression compared to the Super Bowl incident, there we can see like the like complexity of it. Even for Madonna to be able to challenge these hegemonic ideas, it comes from this aura of power that she has. The suggestion that her appeal and popularity comes from her aura of power rather than her sexuality and persona and her ability to manipulate her own image is appealing. Her texts equate pleasure with power and sexuality with control, which provides a perfect instance of this postmodern feminist heroine, cellaring the virtues of political indeterminacy in her insistent play with sexual expression. This aura of power, which really is her proximity to whiteness, and she has this benefit of being able to appropriate and subsequently subvert the white male gaze, exemplified by the way she embodies old Hollywood scarlets like Marilyn Monroe or Marlene Dietrich. And there's a great video essay specifically on this by Be Kind Rewind. So even as she transgressive, she's tapping into hegemonic ideas, playing with this concept of the Madonna whore complex, being the way that men view women through a dichotomy. This really virgin, innocent, pure Madonna, always promiscuous and morally deficient. And she really, she as a white woman isn't bound by these concepts. How would I say that? And what she's allowed to do is really play very interestingly with these concepts. But then you have something like the Jezebel stereotype, which is very similar to the Madonna whore complex, where black women were portrayed as these promiscuous and hypersexual heathens, specifically to justify the dehumanizing treatment towards them. I think we've rarely seen black women choose to really confront and play with that stereotype head on. And I think that's pretty much why Whitney Houston, for pretty much all of her career, really avoided explicit references. And then you could look at also the way Janet kind of negotiated her sexuality in the public eye. Or even like Brandy lying about her pregnancy, where basically she said that, she was married to kind of legitimize that pregnancy. We see that within the black community, there's a different way of processing, I guess, ideas on sexuality and how that's experienced in community. And I even think about, like, for Beyonce, much of her more charged lyricism and expression came in her 30s, with almost 15 years under her belt, and with her being married, which again is more of like this legitimization. We even see with Janet, you can kind of watch my Janet series on that. But then, like, again, we're talking about Beyonce, but like if you look at her earlier work with Destiny's Child, much of the rhetoric is in line with like feminist ideas. You have songs which are very uplifting, like Independent Woman and Bootylicious. Then you have like songs like Nasty Girl, which are very, very misogynistic and violent in the rhetoric. But again, I think this is why you need to, again, kind of have an intersectional mind when we're thinking about this sort of stuff, when we're thinking about pop culture. Because I understand why for three black women who are over-sexualized and adultified, why they are coming out in such a way and being like, don't perceive me like that, in a way that can be dehumanizing because of the way gender and race interacts for black women. Madonna very much wants and has this ability to be transgressive and explore different social complexes and own it and say, listen, I don't care how you perceive me. And that is empowering. That's what I really love about Madonna. There's just this innovation and intuitive element to her art and her success. It's about this cultivation of self that just captures the spirit of pop culture, leaning into the past but creating something that's current, which will very much outlive the artist. Madonna's work and what she's just created her entire career to be in terms of visual public aesthetics, even to this day she's still reinventing and embodying fresh new aesthetics. But when a lot of her peers have stuck with what works with them, that's completely fine. But she has and she gets some very valid criticism about how and why she chooses transgression, and whether it's merely for shock value in order to gain monetary and social capital, or whether she's doing it to again be this representative figure, whether there's social political agenda behind her work. And to be honest, I think whether Madonna is being so self-motivated, in all honesty, it doesn't actually really matter too much. But I do kind of have to question her in the way that she chooses to wield this influence. I remember I think it was last year, she got into some beef with Cardi B because she was basically like, look what I've done for all these women, and then she was like, if it wasn't for my work back in the day, we wouldn't be seeing things like WAP or Kim Kardashian, so these bitches need to be grateful. Which kind of brings into question, what is the intent behind this work? And is it actually truly influential in saying, okay, yes, something like WAP wouldn't have been able to happen if it wasn't for Madonna's work. But then again, that's negating the kind of history within female hip-hop, black female hip-hop, and how there was a lot of resistance. For example, Lil' Kim, who came out in a very, who was very different to the female rappers before and at her time, who had to embody this very masculine energy to even kind of exist in the hip hop space. And we have Lil' Kim come, who again also was inspired by Madonna, but she came in, and even though she experienced loads of backlash, and even for example Missy Elliott, they embodied and explored female sexuality, black female sexuality, in a way that truly influenced, your Cardi B's, your Nicki Minaj's, your Meg Thee Stallions. And even despite of all like the backlash they received, those are truly the ones who've paved way. Bell Hooks has this really good criticism of Madonna. To be honest, I'm not a fan of everything that Bell Hooks has to say about Madonna, and particularly other like pop female stars like Beyonce. How her female expression is bad for other women and
whatever y'all got going on.
And like I said, she does go a bit too hard on Madonna in my view. But Bell Hooks really does kind of capture the problem with Madonna's kind of transgressive nature, arguing how I feel like a lot of, I guess, neoliberal feminism it's really about only wanting to gain power and use power just to be a white male and be able to use systems of power and oppression the same way like that. And basically the center of her critique is Madonna's 1991 documentary, Truth or Dare, or in some countries it's called In Bed with Madonna. I watched this and honestly, it made me fall in love with Madonna. It just completely sold me on everything that she represents, everything that she's done for pop culture. Watch that and you'll be like, oh, like this woman truly is a force. And yeah, Queen of Pop is a deserved title. But what's also interesting is actually how this documentary kind of is the start of this curiosity to what's really going on behind the lives of celebrities, and them being so willing and frank to kind of open up and show so much of themselves on camera. And I think through the documentary, Madonna really exerts this physical and symbolic control of the team around her, who are predominantly made up of marginalized groups, particularly gay men, other women, and just black women and men in her team. Kind of positions herself almost as like this motherly figure. Yet, when this is kind of what Bell Hooks says, is that there's no subversive control that she exercises over the white men in her life, such as boyfriend Warren Beatty, who is seen throughout the documentary. Hooks argues that this is a sign of how Madonna's transgressiveness and the power that she derives from her pop culture dominance is merely so that she can exact power in a very heteronormative way. This is what Hooks had to say. To say nothing, however, is to be complicit with the very forces of domination which make blonde ambition necessary to Madonna's success. Tragically, all that is transgressive and potentially empowering to feminist women and men about Madonna's work may be undermined by all that it contains that is reactionary and in no way conventional or new. It's often the conservative elements of her work converging with the status quo that has the most powerful impact. For example, given the rampant homophobia in society and the concomitant heterosexist voyeurist obsession with gay lifestyles, to what extent does Madonna progressively seek to challenge this? If she insists on primarily representing gays as some sort of emotionally handicapped or defect, or when Madonna responds to the criticism that she exploits gay men by cavalierly stating, what does exploitation mean? In a revolution, some people have to get hurt. To get people to change, you have to turn the table over. Some dishes get broken. I can only say this because this doesn't sound like liberation to me. Perhaps when Madonna explores her memories of her white working class childhood in a troubled family in a way that enables her to understand intimately the politics of exploitation, domination, and submission, she will have a deeper connection to oppositional black culture. If and when this radical critical self-interrogation takes place, she will have the power to create new and different cultural productions, work that will be truly transgressive, acts of resistance that transform rather than seduce. And I mean, I cannot lie, Bell Hooks ate her up. Tore her to shreds here, because an intersectional approach proves important in understanding what the value in Madonna's tendency to kind of appropriate and be so keen in being representational. Very little value to what she's doing. People see a video like a Virgin as positive, as the video represents the realities of African Americans by exploring racism and the importance of the black church, arguably paving the way for more positive representation for this cultural group. But it isn't that. Again, I want to be clear that this isn't a call to we're cancelling Madonna. It's a nuanced discussion about the cultural implications of her work. But what's so strange about this, particularly this Like a Virgin video, is it's tackling so many things like police brutality and, you know, Jim Crow era racism. But one, it's just, all it is just a song about lots of innuendo. And two, it positions Madonna as this white savior, and it's bizarre. And also I feel like the representation of the black church here kind of clashes with Madonna's kind of politic anyway, ignoring its formative role in African American culture and the legacy of misogyny and homophobia in the black church. Madonna has this privilege to kind of, you know, appropriate that and tell this cute little story, which I think is even crazy because all it did was stir up loads of controversy, and she ended up making millions of dollars from it, even though Pepsi, like they had to pull the ad campaign because the Vatican got upset or whatever.
Whatever y'all got going on.
But again, like Madonna has this privilege to appropriate it, but then you have like Whitney Houston, who wasn't even allowed to express in a gospel way until much later in her career, with I'm Your Baby Tonight kind of being slowly a part of that, and also The Bodyguard with Jesus Loves Me. Madonna's celebrated expression of sexuality is an intersectional privilege that must be acknowledged, one which many black women, including Whitney, and still to this day, are unable to express or articulate. In conclusion, through this video essay's kind of exploration of pop culture and how we discuss and think about such an amazing icon like Madonna, it emphasizes how intersectional privilege extends to Madonna's career, even with how much space she takes up in cultural discourse. An intersectional approach requires active reimaginations of pop culture analysis to ensure history, in being oppositional with readings of Madonna, doesn't neglect the cultural significance of her contemporaries who faced and still face intersectional challenges. We don't ignore or undermine the still prevalent plight of women and women of color in cultural spaces. You have an opportunity, and I feel like it's a real onus to truly celebrate, and uplift women who have accomplished so much in spite of, which Madonna has also done, but that narrative has always been and will continue to always be embraced and celebrated and explored and dissected and unpacked. And like I said, often paints a narrative that is an injustice to so many hardworking artists who put in as much work or even more work, and didn't wield those same sort of success. And that's something I want to continue to really explore on this channel. I know there's three women in particular I know I want to do videos on. I want to do even four. Donna Summer, Lil' Kim, Missy Elliott, and even Lauryn Hill. And even like right now I'm working on a video kind of talking about how Mariah Carey illustrates longing through her music. But again, another artist and another way I think that kind of that exemplifies the need for intersectional analysis is Luther Vandross, who was closeted for pretty much, yes, all of his life. And again, we see how Madonna was able to have that open sexual fluidity and pretty much thrive, whereas others like Vandross and Whitney and so many others that we don't know. You know, we can joke about it and laugh about it.
I think more guys who are gay in hip-hop should come out.
Yes. Do you think there's more?
Girl. I mean, come on.
But there are, again, and I said this in the Whitney video, there are systemic issues that impact who gets to be who and who gets to embody themselves and who gets to be themselves, or whether they have to embody something that can ensure that their album goes platinum. I hope this video sort of acts as a starting point. Yeah, I've done the Whitney one, and you could even talk about like my Janet series, but really a starting point where we can begin to explore and evaluate the public experiences of public figures and how that kind of relates to sense of self. Madonna is ultimately a positive experience to talk about a woman who owned herself and showed up as herself and reaped the benefits, even if it's done in a way that can be a bit egotistical and self-centered, which doesn't have to be a completely bad thing. But now in understanding Madonna's success and the institutional forces that enabled it, we can now have a bit more of a nuanced framework which we can use to explore the lives of some of our favorite icons. Comment down below your own thoughts and feelings about, I guess, kind of the concept of this video, the kind of intersectional framework, and how you kind of understand it and seeing working in Madonna's life. I think what's would be kind of interesting is, again, like maybe like, again, kind of go in the comments and talk about like other celebrities, other public figures that have had a very interesting experience compared to a story like Madonna's. I really want the comment section to be like a learning space where people are sharing their own perspectives and their own views on not just Madonna, but loads of other artists that this conversation brings to their mind. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe, more content is coming, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Say my last.